Salvate omnes and welcome to this week's video tutorial. Today we have chapter 8, third conjugation, present system. And this is going to be the topic of verbs. In fact, let me pull up our declensions. Let's see, where is that? It's not in here. Let's see. Images. There she is. This is the one that I prefer to use right here. So remember that nouns have declensions or parts of speech. So here we have the subject, here we have the possessive, here we have the indirect object, here we have the direct object, and here we have some prepositional phrase or adverbial phrase. Verbs have tenses or persons and numbers. For example, if we say I love, that is first person singular, present tense. In Latin, that would be amo, following our osmos tisnit. So this is a good opportunity to review a common solecism, namely the conflation between verbs and nouns and the various endings that we need to ascribe to them. So let's take a look at this chapter in closer detail. As always, you will definitely want to read through this. Again, if we were in class, we would do it together, but you can, I think, do this on your own. And then you'll definitely want to do the self-tutorial exercises in the back. As your book points out, the third conjugation ends in ERE versus the ARE of first declension. Or if I just made a mistake, first conjugation back in chapter 1, and the ERE with the macron or the long accent mark, which is second conjugation. There is a synopsis of the 5 different conjugations in Latin in the back of your book, or of course you could readily look that online. Also, if you are struggling a little bit with Latin grammar, I highly recommend, and I think I have this on the syllabus, and I've mentioned it before, English Grammar for Students of Latin, which has a side-by-side comparison of these grammar points. Although everything that we need to be successful in Latin is in the Wheelocks. So you can see here, we're still following our osmos tisnit. So O is I, S is you, T is he, she, it, mus is we, tis is you all, nunt is they. Except that we have to be mindful of the vowel which introduces that particular conjugation. Or in the future indicative active, as your book points out, the first and second conjugation use bo, be, be, boo, followed by the endings osmos tisnit, whereas here it uses a longer vowel, either A for first person singular or E in the other persons and numbers. So by person, we mean first, second, or third, and then number, we mean singular or plural. But once again, since we don't do a lot of into Latin, we just need to be able to recognize this as indicating the future tense. And then as always, if we're unsure, we'll look up words in either a dictionary or Whitaker's Word. So here you can see ducit, which is present active indicative third person singular. But if I change the spelling, you're going to see this now becomes the future tense. So sure enough, now we have future active indicative third person singular. So that change from the I to the E indicates a change from the present to the future tense. And you can see that this is also indicated here. Again, I've said several times I have a Kindle version, so it looks a little wonky or blurry. And then the imperfect still follows bam, base, bot, bamos, bates, bant. except we have a longer vowel or macron to indicate that. So that one, again, all this is explained a little bit more in detail as you read through the chapter here. So again, to summarize, your first conjugation verbs end in ARE, your second conjugation verbs end in ERE with the macron, and third without. And then the infinitive means to. So mare means to love, habere means to have, but ducere means to lead. So we've had that before. Again, this is a helpful description. There also is latintutorial.com, which I highly recommend if you're looking for a YouTube video. So just go to YouTube and type in Latin tutorial, and then the topic, in this case, third conjugation, and you'll have a very nice overview, albeit with different vocabulary, of this chapter. You'll definitely want to learn the vocabulary. Again, if we were in class, we would practice this more with different games, different examples, Quizlet. But given the online format, this is something you need to do on your own. And then here's the learning vocabulary in this chapter, which we will be referring to in our examples. So we will definitely want to study this vocabulary carefully. And as noted, do the self-tutorial exercises for which you have the answers in the back of the book before we do the sententia antiquae, which presuppose that you've done the things that we just mentioned. All right, let's go into the examples here. So, unos frata meos vitam in otio semper aget. Terence, who is a major, all these are major Latin writers. So he is a comedian. So once again, we have to take perhaps this sentence with a grain of salt. It's probably doing just the opposite if we were to look in the context. So here we have frater. Of course, we think of fraternity, and sure enough, so my brother. And then aget is future tense. So if we go aget here, you can see it's future active indicative singular. If I do agit, you can see that's present tense. So it goes from I to E, and that's just going to have to be memorized. So here we have different meanings. Here's our principal parts. Ago, agere, eki, actus, what it means will do, or will spend, or will live. And so we'll look at the example right now. So my brother will always live a life in leisure. Or if we look at, will always spend a life with leisure. This one loses a little bit in translation. Or so in English, we probably have to say, my brother will always live a life of leisure, would make probably the best English sense. Again, in the context, he's probably not living a life of leisure, but probably some sort of servant or slave who's under constant threat of crucifixion, which was a common way to get people to act accordingly. Nowadays, of course, it's just paying taxes. So frater meos vitam in otio semper aget. So my brother will always live a life in leisure, but in English we'd probably say of leisure. So I'm going to put that right there. So my brother will always live. So I'm translating the aget for will always, aget semper, for the Latin here, but literally conducts always a life in leisure would be the literal translation. Will always live a life of leisure, even though the grammar in the Latin says in leisure, because otio, we do have a word in English, otios. Again, I think we've had this word before, but this is going to be dative. And so also, I could also be, I guess, ablative as well. But in either case, it's going to be second declension. Pull this down here. It's going to be second declension either dative or ablative. Probably in this case, since it's answering how, we probably should put it in the ablative. So OTO ending in the letter O matches what we have in the Latin. All right, moving on to duo. Age juve me duc me ad secundum filium meum. And here they give us some translation here. So this is the imperative going back to chapter 1 using the same verb. So come on, help me. Take me to my second son. So maybe perhaps he's missing, or he's been abducted, or he's lost in some sense. So he's asking for help. So come on, help me, lead me or take me to my second son. So let's write that out here. So come on, help me, take me to, let's see, did I get the correct pronunciation? Yeah. So here we have imperative. Also, juve is imperative. Once again, if we're not sure about the vocabulary, so this is juvo, juvare, but you can see here, this is present active imperative. Classical Latin did not have a J. Later it did. But you can see some various translations for this. You have to use the context to choose the best one. And then duc also is in the imperative form, because we have duco, ducere, duxi, ductum as, or ductus, they're using the us form for supine. Here are our principal parts, and it can be lead, command, probably not any of these other ones, don't make any sense. And so so take me or lead me to my second son. Notice to my second son, ad is always followed by the accusative. And so we have second declension accusative singular, which of course matches our declension chart accusative second person singular. So that one's pretty straightforward. So much in learning a language is knowing the vocab, and you just have to look up words and practice and learn the examples. O amici, libertatem perdimus, liberius. I don't think we've had him before. So, O friends, we are destroying liberty. So, O friends, we are destroying liberty. So this one's fairly straightforward. Oh, friends, or you could even say, oh, my friends, but amici is second declension nominative plural. So again, think syllabus, syllabi. So, oh, friends, and then perdimus, mus means we, and perdere means to destroy, against where we get the word perdition in English. And then destroying what? Well, libertatem ends in em, that tells us it's the direct object. So if we look third declension accusative singular, here's the singular over here. You can see it ends in em, so that is the object of the destruction. So this one is fairly straightforward. Once again, once we know the vocab. Oh, friends, we are destroying liberty. Quatuor, nova pericula popula Romano exponam sine more. A little bit more challenging. So again, we need to look up the words, but once you do that, it probably is helpful to find the subject and verb, because that's what we're used to in English. So exponam, here an exposition or exponent in mathematics means to set forth or to explain. Now it is in the future tense. How do you know that? Well, because it is third conjugation. So if you go back and look at your explanations earlier in the book, you can see here that for the future, it has the vowel A for first person singular. So again, this is a little bit wonky in the layout, but so the letter A, again, if we're still not sure, then we just have to look up words. By the way, this is why using Whitaker's words is so much more efficient for learning than Google Translate, because it slows you down. It's like anything else in life. You know this, but if you just rush through it, you're very unlikely to learn anything. And so take your time, get out a dictionary, it would be even better. But Whitaker's words is certainly better than Google Translate, which is just too fast for most person's level of Latin or anything in terms of learning a language. So exponam, now here it could mean present active subjunctive, but here we just use common sense. We haven't had subjunctive yet, so it's not going to be that. So here we're going to follow the future active indicative first person singular. And so we're going to say I will explain, or if you want to use British English, I shall explain. So I will explain for exponam. And then going back to the example here, and then don't forget a lot of this vocab is actually in the vocabulary section, so sort of keep that in mind. So I will explain, but then we could move around some of this. Now here's where it gets a little bit trickier. Sine more means without delay. Sine is a preposition meaning without. Again, if we're not sure, we'll just look it up. But it's always followed by the ablative. So first declension ablative singular is a with the macron. That's where we get words like moratorium. I think we've had this word before. So I will explain without delay. And you'll see you could move around some of the elements in this sentence, but probably beginning with exponam makes the most sense. But then explain what to whom. Well, here's where you have to know our ending. So nova pericula, we've had pericula before. It's a neuter noun, but it ends in a. So this is going to be second declension neuter accusative plural. See the a and the a? And then, sure enough, here's our neuter plural ending in a, accusative plural. Now, again, if we're not sure about this, I'm not going to do this for all the examples, but you just have to look up the words, and once again you're going to have to use judgment based on learning to decipher. Well, it's not being used as the subject or the nominative. How do we know that? Well, because the verb is in the singular first person, so you can't have a third person subject with a first person verb in terms of subject verb agreements. That just doesn't work. So we're able to eliminate that, and then it's not the vocative because we have no context that somebody's speaking to someone. So the only thing left through logic is accusative plural, and it means dangers. So we go back to our example. I will explain without delay the new dangers because we have nova pericula. But then to whom? To the Roman people. So let me write that down. To the, again, you want to capitalize adjective nouns. Some of you on your test are not capitalizing your adjective nouns. Now, populo romano both end in O. Why? Because second declension dative singular is O. Remember, dative is to or for whom something is done. So this is a good example where, so number 4 is a good one. Probably where you should be. If you understand number 4, you're right where you need to be in terms of grammar and Latin at this point, because we have a lot going on here. We have a new conjugation, we have neuter nouns, we have ablative with prepositions, and so we have accusative, we have dative, we have ablative, and then you have to be aware of the word order. And so most verbs do end in osmos tisnit, but first person singular often ends with M as well. So this one is a little bit trickier, but again, they give us the vocab here, and I think we just explained it. All right, quinque, numquam periculum sine periculo vincimus. Again, the Wheelock does a really good job of, this one is a little bit tricky, but they give us the same vocabulary, or some of it, to kind of reinforce that element. So numquam means never. So that's just an adverb, so we look it up. So, and then here we have periculum, which is singular, but then here we have ablative because we just got done saying that sine always is followed by the ablative. So second declension ablative singular is O, so periculo. But then vincemus, this is a good one to know, and so we'll just type this one up here to explain it. So this is, of course, Julius Caesar, Veni Vidi Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. But here it's future active, first person plural. So P means plural. So it means we will never conquer is num quam vincimus. Let's write that down because English likes the subject verb first. So we will never, num quam, conquer. Think of like vincible, invincible. We will never conquer what without what? We will never conquer danger without danger. So we will never conquer danger without danger. What does that mean? Because you may have to write about this on your test. Well, if you want to achieve something, if you want to learn how to climb Mount Everest, it's going to be dangerous. In fact, many people never come back alive. Anything else, right? You want to get to a high level of sports, it's probably going to put yourself at risk of injury. Competitive politics, you can go on and on. The higher you try to achieve, the more risk and danger there is that there'll be setbacks and other obstacles that you will have to overcome. So that one's a good one right there. Playing it safe probably is not the way to a successful, meaningful life. All right, sex ex meus erroribus homnibus rectum iter demonstrare possum. So here we have Seneca, the Stoic tutor of Nero, before he was executed. Possum, so I am able to demonstrate the right way from my human errors. So let me write that down, then I'll try to explain it here. So I am able to demonstrate the right way from my human errors. Once again, a little bit abstract, but it shouldn't. One of the purposes of Wheelock, I think I mentioned before, is to get you thinking about the original Latin. Sure, we could come up with a better translation, but then we'd be changing a lot of the vocab, and it wouldn't be as literal, and it'd probably be harder to understand. So I try to keep the translations literal, and I think the image that the words create is clear enough. So what does that even mean? Well, posso means I am able. We've had that before. And then here's our infinitive, to demonstrate. So that one's fairly straightforward. And then here we have a adjective word, which they give us. Remember, if it's in italics, that's the translation. These are some words in English that are derived from it. But then iter is actually the direct object in this case. This one's a little bit trickier because, once again, we're going to have to look up words because the ending is third declension accusative singular. Now remember, this grammar chart isn't something that Romans used, and there's always exceptions. So these are the basic patterns because iter, it doesn't, when you look at third declension accusative singular, think, well, wait a second, Dr. Thomas, it ends in EM. Well, there's always exceptions, but by and large, if you can learn this, you're going to be really successful in Latin and reading original Latin text. But here's an outlier, but this is something we're going to have to be aware of, and of course they give us the meaning of it right here. But then ex means from, like exit, and then ex is always followed by the ablative. So this is second declension ablative plural. This is third declension ablative plural. This is third declension ablative plural because these latter two words require third declension. How do we know that? We learn the vocabulary and look it up in a dictionary or Whitaker's Words. So here's our ibus, but then our ablative, ibus, but then it meis because my is a first, second declension adjective ending. And so we put it all together is that I am able to demonstrate the right way from my human errors. What does that mean? Well, of course, we all make mistakes, but hopefully we are learning from them. Okay. Catullus. So here we have Catullus, major Roman poet. Catullus agit. Once again, this is a good opportunity to review our verb tenses. So agit is present tense. Get is future tense. So this one can take some time to get used to because third conjugation doesn't follow the bo be be boo as the first and second conjugation do. So Catullus gives many thanks to Marcus Tullius Cicero. So let me write that down here. So Catullus gives many thanks or much thanks to Marcus Tullius Cicero, of course, the great Roman statesman. And you give thanks to someone. So remember, dative is to or for whom something is done. So O. And then I is going to follow O, but then Cicero is like Caesar is third declension. So we have I. So Marcus Tullius Cicero. Other than that, it's fairly straightforward. Notice that magnes gratias is first declension, accusative, plural. So that's much thanks. And so we put that in the plural in Latin. And yeah, and they're asking us to look at chapter 28, which we're not going to, but there's a further development of this idea in a longer text. All right, so next we go to Livy, the Roman historian. Eximia forma virginis oculos hominum convertit. This one, we have to look at our vocab here. So extraordinary, eximius. So we're going to go extraordinary, and then to convert. Convertere means to turn around or to attract. Converse and convert are English derivatives. So the extraordinary form of the girl turns the eyes of men. So there she's attractive. So the extraordinary form of the girl, I mean, you could say of the maiden, but that sounds a little bit old-fashioned in English. The extraordinary form of the girl turns, there's our verb, the eyes of men, or you could even say of people. But, so we go back here, so eximia, so we're just following the vocab here. But then form, now form could also be beauty. It's one of those things where if you look it up, it can mean many things, but it can mean form, figure, beauty, appearance, probably not fashion. So you can choose which one if you want to go beauty or form or appearance. Might make sense there. Again, I try to keep it literal so we can follow the Latin. So the extraordinary form and then of the girl. So this is going to be third declension genitive singular. So we can look that up on Whitaker's Words to confirm. So of the girl. And then convertit means turns, but then turns what? The eyes. That is second declension accusative plural. But then of men, because of men is third declension genitive plural. There's our And sure enough, we have right here too. That's where we get the word Homo sapiens. Number 9, I'm going to do a couple more here. Agamemnon, of course, the idea was that when Helen, they were all fighting for Helen, but Helen's father made all the Greek leaders promise that to whomever she was given or betrothed, that the other Greek leaders would protect Helen. And so they all swore a pact. And of course, she was abducted. by after the Paris, or the judgment of Paris rather, and Agamemnon had to defend Helen's, or in this case, I guess, Menelaus's honor, and of course that is what started the Trojan War. Anyway, that's the context for that. So Agamemnon, Magnes copias etera Graeca Troiam ducet ubi multos viros necebit. So we got a little longer one here. So Agamemnon will lead many troops from the territory of Greece, literally from the Greek territory, to Troy, where he will kill many men. So let me write that down here. And I'm just going to keep it shorthand. So Agamemnon will lead many troops from, we could just say Greece, to Troy, where he will kill many men. I think I got that right. So Agamemnon will lead many troops from Greece to Troy, where he will kill. Okay. So let's try to explain this here. So Agamemnon, we just explained that Greek leader. And then Magnes copies, that is the direct object. That is first declension accusative plural. So Magnes copies, again, if you're not sure about the vocab, you can look words up, which I'm doing here as an example. And it means troops in this context. That is one of the challenges with the Wheelocks, is the context. Sometimes you have to play around with it, and even then, sometimes it's just the way it is. So Agamemnon will lead. Now, I think what's important to hear now, we're learning the third conjugation, and even for me, it can be sometimes tricky in terms of the change in vowels. The bo be be boo is a little bit easier to recognize as future. But that's our hint. If this is in the future tense, this is likely in the future tense. And then sure enough, if we've had this verb before already in an earlier example, but we look it up here, it is future active indicative third person singular. So will lead. So Agamemnon will lead many troops, and then literally from the land, Greek, but we'll just say from Greece to Troy. So ad is always followed by the accusative. So first declension accusative singular is am. And then ubi means where, and then he will kill. So necebit means will kill, because neko, nakare, nakavi, nakatum means to kill. And then multos viros, that is second declension accusative plural. Multos viros, many men. So that one reads fairly straightforward. And then the last one we'll do from the Sententia Antiquae, amor laudis hominis trahit, love of praise draws men. In other words, people like to be praised, people like to be flattered. So love of praise draws men. This one's fairly straightforward, but it's a good opportunity to review the genitive. Amor laudis. So laudis, right there, is. And then traho, like a tractor. So traho, trahare, traxi, tractum. And then homines is our third declension accusative plural. So accusative plural, that's the object of being drawn. So the love of praise draws men by Cicero. Okay, Cicero thought people should be moved or drawn by virtue, whereas some of the weaker passions in his view were some of the reasons why Rome was in the dire straits that he thought it was. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward. I think, once again, if you just slow it down, pause the video, look up the words, I think we've explained these in relative good order. All right, let's take a look at the longer passage in this chapter. Cicero on the ethics of waging war. So we'll give this a title. I can type here. And once again, Cicero, 106 to 43 BC, Rome's greatest statesman. I think I said before, the reason we have so much in this book by Cicero is that we know more about ancient Rome from Cicero in his writings than any other author, and so he's often and Cicero, unlike a lot of other Latin authors, I think I mentioned, doesn't require a whole lot of context, whereas Virgil arguably would be, maybe in some senses more interesting. Virgil, without reading the entire context of a lot of his language, is really hard to intuit and to explain and learn. All right, so here we go. Let's read it together. Civitas bellum sine cause bona aut propter iram gerere non debet. Si fortunes et agros vitisque popula nostri sine bello defendere pot erimus. Tum pacem conservare debibimus. Si autem non poti eramus esse salvi et servare patriam libertatemque nostrum sine bello. Bellum ira necessarium. Semper debimus demonstrare tamen magnum officium in bello et magnum clementiam post victoriam. So we have a longer passage, so definitely read it aloud. Read it like you would in English, but then we got to go back and we're going to have to, might take you an hour to work through this passage on your own. So we have quite a lot of vocab that they give us here. I'm not going to always go back and forth, but they do try to explain some of the context here. And I think it's a good question even today. When is it just to wage war? And you'll see that Cicero's answer is fairly consistent with most rational common sense, namely if you're attacked without provocation, then you are justified in defending yourself. So here we have civitas. Now civitas means, it is where we get words, civis and citizen, but we had this before. So we'll just look it up here. It means estate in this case. Cives, where we get the word citizens, but in this case, he's talking about the state. So we're going to go right down here. So take off the bold. So a state. So remember, Latin doesn't use a or the. So a state ought not to wage war without good cause or on the account of anger. So let me write that down, then we'll explain it. So a state ought not or should not wage war for, let's see, was it for, I guess, without good cause. So I'm going to try to follow the grammar a little bit more closely. A state ought not to wage war without good cause or on account of anger. So let's talk about the line here. So a state, and then non debet means ought not or should not, and then gerere means to wage. So again, if you look at some in Whitaker's, you wage war or to carry out war. But then bellum is our direct object. So again, they actually have this as one of, see, it says bellum right there. So the context tells us that the state is the subject and the war or bellum is the direct object. Again, only the context will tell you that, but based on the context, bellum is the direct object. So a state ought not to wage war without good cause. So sine cause bonae. Again, sine is always followed by the ablative. So first declension, ablative singular is AA. Out means or, propter means on account of, followed by the accusative. Iram, we've had before, it's where we get the words like irate. So in this case, on account of anger. This can also be translated as because of anger. But Latin uses the accusative here. That's why we have am, because first declension, accusative singular is am. So first declension, accusative singular. All right, so then moving on here. Si fortunes. So if fortune or it might be fortunes. Let me turn the page here and see how it's worked here. So, oh yeah, so it is fortunes. So if the fortunes, let me pull it up here. So if the fortunes, so C fortunes, remember Latin doesn't use a or the. So in this case, it makes sense to use the. So the fortunes, because if a fortunes doesn't make any sense. Because that's a is singular, whereas fortunes is plural. So if the fortunes, fields, and lives of the people, so let me write that down here. If the fortunes, fields, and lives of the people. So we've had some of this vocabulary in earlier chapters. So agros, we get words like agriculture. So if the fortunes et agros vitisque of our people, so notice that of our people is second declension, genitive singular. So genitive always means of. Without war, we will be able to defend. So we may have to change the word order here. So without war, we will be able to defend. So in this case, we'd probably have to say, because notice that poterimus, which is future tense. Again, we can confirm that right here. Yeah, so it's future tense. So if we will be able, but English likes that subject verb earlier, so we might want to say if we will be able to defend. So let's go ahead and just change that. So if we will be able to defend. Notice that English would probably say if we can defend, because English has an implied future tense, but we need to put it in the future tense because Latin tenses are more precise than English. And so for a Roman, they would not put it in the present tense, so we need it in the future tense. So a state ought not to wage war without good cause or on account of danger. If we will be able to defend the fortunes, fields, and lives of our people. Let's see, I think it's of our people, right? Yeah, nostri. Of our people without war. So let's go ahead and take that off since we move the position of those words rather. Then we ought to protect peace. Now, conservare, let's see if we have other options here. We ought to maybe keep the peace, or maintain peace. So we should maintain peace. So literally we should. Now this actually is in the future tense, but I'm going to keep it just we should because we already have implied futures. In this case, we actually can, although it's literally we will maintain, then we will maintain peace. So maybe I should be consistent. So then we will maintain peace. So we go back here. So to means then. We will, or literally we ought to, but in the future tense. So we should maintain. Pacem is third declension, accusative singular. And so that is our direct object. And then we have a semicolon, which was more common back then. Actually, they didn't use any punctuation, but until the latter half of the 20th century, people use a lot more semicolons. Alta means but if, or it can also mean however. So you can decide here how you want to do this. I'll just since I think might be better style today, say but if. But if you want to say however, comma, that would be fine too. But if we will not, literally, so here's the future tense, we will not be safe. But if we will not be safe, so I think we had salvi in the last chapter. So, but if, so mus means we will not be safe, and protect the fatherland and liberty of our without war. So if we will not be safe, and once again, English probably is going to say cannot, and cannot protect the homeland and our liberty without war, and cannot protect the homeland and liberty without war. English is probably going to say, but if we cannot protect our people and liberty without war. But the Latin here doesn't say people, it says patria, which means fatherland or country. So without war, sine means without war, war will be necessary. So here we can actually keep the original word order. War, erit, and then necessary, coming right from the Latin necessarium. War will be necessary. So erit is future tense, irregular will be. We ought, so mus means we ought always to show, so demonstrate means to show, or will, oops, I forgot the verb here. Let's see here. So yeah, we ought always, okay. So here they have the tamen. So this means, so we have autem, which means but however. This can mean however or nevertheless. So since it's tamen here, I'm going to put that however first. So however for the tamen, and then just for stylistic reasons, and then mus is we, and then we ought always to show. That's how we're going to do that. So we, or we should, or ought, we should always show, for demonstrare, so there's our infinitive. However, we should always show magnum officium. Now, magnum officio literally means great duty, but it means, in this case, probably can also mean great virtue. Do they give us, so if we look up on Whitaker's words, Cicero wrote a text called De Officio. So I guess maybe kindness or duty. None of these really, what it means is it kind of lacks translation. You might say in today's, those kind of almost untranslatable, I guess justice, but notice justitia is not what he's using. So probably duty in this case means moral probity or uprightness. So let's go ahead and just keep it in the duty to get you thinking about what it might mean. We should always show great, in fact, I'm going to say virtue, because that's not one of the words listed here, but trust me, if we read other Cicero, that's sort of what he means, I think, although it's somewhat untranslatable. We have to always, do they give us a translation here? No. Okay. So we ought always to show great virtue in war. In other words, having some moral responsibility. So great virtue in war. So in bello, because bello is second declension ablative singular. And great mercy after victory. And great mercy after victory. If you wanted to say clemency, which is kind of maybe an old-fashioned word in the law or moral, you could do that as well. And great mercy after victory. I guess they have a comma here, so we'll put that there. All right, so that one is a little bit tricky. You might want to go back and kind of watch this video, even though I did it in a somewhat choppy manner. That's just because the text is longer. So, but I think we have a fairly good translation, explanation of that, following just a careful understanding of the endings, looking up words, and then a little bit tricky sometimes with the word order on this. And of course, the meaning is something to consider. They have a question here: what specific ethical views on waging war are set forth here? Do you agree or disagree with them? And how do they compare with modern American attitudes and practices? Anyways, just food for thought. And that is the end of what we're going to do. Our next chapter is demonstratives. So this one will require, as you'll see, like this man or that thing. And then moving on beyond that is chapter 10, which will be the last chapter for... Did I already skip that? Let's see, I passed it by already. No, chapter 10 is fourth conjugation, which is IRE. So it'll be similar to what we just talked about today, but verbs that end in IRE versus the letter E, or E with a macron, or A. All right, as always, feel free to email me. I will be working on your grades this week. I probably will pass, or rather forward you some opportunity for extra credit. But if you want to jump ahead and get ready for the final exam, it will be cumulative on chapters 1 through 10. And maybe we could talk about setting up a review session in person, or as always, you can just email me. And yeah, so enjoy.